And when we compare ourselves to others, then we start to feel that we're inadequate or that we don't have enough, or imposter syndrome comes in, or perfectionism will rise. When we start to follow people and we start to look at other people's success and compare it to ours and wonder, well, why don't we have that same success? The reality is we don't know what's going on behind the scenes.
Welcome to the Midland Money Mindset. This is a podcast that's all about getting your mind right when it comes to all things money. In every episode, we go deep with engaging guests who provide tangible takeaways and a whole lot of joy along the way. I hope you enjoy these conversations as much as I enjoyed having them. Let's dive into today's show. I'm Larry Sprung, your host for the Midland Money Mindset and founder and wealth advisor of Midland Financial. Today's guest is Danielle Cobo, best-selling author and keynote speaker. Danielle is a former Fortune 500 senior sales manager with over 15 years of corporate experience. She knows how to build high-performing teams that increase sales, productivity, and employee retention. She propelled her team to the #1 national ranking even amid the upheaval of downsizing, restructuring, and acquisitions. Danielle's commendable leadership earned her region Manager of the Year, and her resiliency motivated her to earn 4 consecutive National Sales Excellence Awards. Danielle is the best-selling author of Unstoppable Grit and hosts the globally top-rated podcast, Unstoppable Grit Podcast with Danielle Cobo. When her husband, a Black Hawk pilot in the Army, was deployed in Iraq for a year, Danielle learned to balance a demanding job while keeping up with her dynamic duo of thrill-seeking 1.5-year-old twin boys. From a 7-year-old entrepreneur to a 2-time, 3-day, 60-mile walker, she defines relentless ambition. Listen in for some great takeaways about Danielle's journey from Fortune 500 executive to being a best-selling author, podcast host, and entrepreneur. Well, I have the pleasure today of being with a very special guest, Danielle Cobo, best-selling author and keynote speaker, empowering individuals with the grit, resilience, and courage to thrive professionally and personally. And I am so excited for this conversation. Welcome to the show, Danielle.
Thanks for having me on the show. I am excited to be here.
Yeah. So listen, we're going to spend a lot of time on what you're doing today, the new book, best-selling author. I'm always fascinated with the entrepreneurial journey. Everybody has a different one. Can you share, how did you get to where you are today?
I had no intentions of being an entrepreneur. I spent 15 years in corporate America, where I was working in the medical device industry as a senior sales manager for one of the top Fortune 500 medical sales companies. And I had no intentions of starting a business. However, after a series of events that took place in 2020, it led me into starting a business. And what that was in 2020, my husband had just returned home from serving a deployment in Iraq. So in 2019, he was gone for a year. My twin boys at the time were between the ages of 1.5 and 2.5 years old. So when he came home, it was a stark difference from when he left to when they came home. When he left, they were 1.5. So they were still kind of doing nighttime bottles, learning to walk. They were still saying some of their first words. They were still in cribs. He comes back and they're in toddler beds and they're formulating complete sentences, and they have opinions with those complete sentences as well. And they've got the terrible 2 tantrums, which is normal. But that transition was a lot harder than I had anticipated. And right as we started to find our rhythm and our groove, March 8th, I had lost my mom. My mom had passed away.
Sorry to hear that.
And it was very devastating for me. And it happened very unexpectedly at a very young age when she passed. And just remember what happened in March of 2020. March 13th, the global pandemic shut the world down. So while I'm trying to cope and grieve and heal from the loss of my mother, the world shuts down. And there was so much uncertainty that took place during that time period. And just shortly after that, to really wrap this in, was the company that I was with had been acquired by a larger organization, and the shift of the culture changed drastically. So all of these changes happened within a 6-month period. I felt like my life had completely flipped upside down professionally and personally, and I just didn't know kind of what to do. I felt lost and confused, and I left the company that I was with for 7 years. I thought I was going to retire with them, but I ended up leaving the company. As I was going through this journey of looking for a job, I started to build my brand on LinkedIn. And while I was building my brand on LinkedIn, people started to reach out to me for career coaching and speaking engagements. And I was like, I wonder if maybe this is a business that I could pursue. How can I really align my passion of mentoring and coaching and speaking, but do this in an element where I get to touch many lives, maybe not just the individuals that were reporting to me on my team. And that's what inspired the journey.
Amazing. Well, thank you for sharing that. And there's a couple of things I'd like to say. Number one is thank you for your service as a military wife. Thank you to your husband for the service to our country. That is greatly appreciated. And I'm very sorry to learn about the passing of your mom, something I'm somewhat familiar with. I lost my mom at the age of 47. She was diagnosed with cancer in her late 30s and ultimately ended up succumbing at a very early age. So I understand losing a mom at a very early age. Obviously, different circumstances, I'm sure, but similar at the same time. So thank you for sharing that. And if that all wasn't enough, the fact that we're entering this global pandemic just kind of exacerbated everything at the same time. So I think you probably learned a lot about yourself. And I know you talk about grit very often, and it sounds like you needed a lot of grit during that period of time. So what does grit mean to you, and how do you share your experiences around that?
Well, one of the most probably recognized definitions of grit is by Angela Duckworth, because she studied grit and she found that passion and perseverance towards long-term goals is what grit is. But I'm a big believer that in addition to that, grit is when we face challenges, it's the refusal to give up and keep moving forward. But what I've found is in order to have grit, we need to have clarity on what our passion is so that we can have the perseverance to keep going.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the why is so important there. It's a must. So what does it mean to you? What is that why for you?
When I had lost my mom, I started to think about what would she want me to say at her obituary? And it was a very profound exercise of not only thinking about what would she want people to say about her during her passing and her celebration of life. In addition, it started getting me to think, well, what do I want people to say about me when it's time for me to pass? And it started this journey of self-reflection. And ultimately, what I decided to do, because this happened right around the time that there was so much uncertainty going on, and right around that time of the toxic work environment, I actually wrote my own obituary. And I wrote it from the perspective of a colleague and a perspective of a family member. And it really got me in thinking about, how do I want people to feel? What do I want people to say about me when I leave this earth? And it ultimately came down to the word impact, and the positive impact that I can make in people's lives, whether it's professionally or personally. And that's what led to kind of understanding my why and what inspired me to start the journey of entrepreneurship as well.
Amazing. Now, did you have any role models growing up that were entrepreneurs, or are you a first generation entrepreneur?
Well, I kind of did have a role model in a way of understanding grit. So when I was 2.5 years old, my mom became a single mom. So she was somebody who didn't have a degree, who was a single mom, who didn't have a lot of money. And I saw her not only going from a single mom, but she, at the time when I was 5 years old, she was getting her bachelor's degree. She was working full time and being a single mom, all in combination of once. And I saw her go from nothing to building a very, very successful career in medical sales. So she actually became a regional sales manager in the early 1990s as a female working for a Fortune 500 company, which was pretty profound at that time to have a female in that high ranking of a role. So I learned my grit from her. And then the entrepreneurship journey really started for me when I was 7 years old. So when I was 7, I used to I lived in Orange County, California, near Saddleback Church, where we would go and we would go to the mountains and we would climb the trees and we would cut mistletoe down from the trees. And we would bundle them up with these velvet red ribbons and we would sell them outside the grocery store. And that's how I'd have money to buy presents for people. So I believed between Girl Scouts and between selling mistletoe that really kind of sparked my entrepreneur journey. But it was also the grit and resilience that was modeled for me by my mom.
Amazing. And you ended up following in her footsteps, right? Your role within corporate America was in medical device sales, similarly to her as well, right?
Yep. I followed right in her footsteps in being a region manager for a medical device company. So she did pharmaceutical, I did medical device.
Gotcha.
There's a distinction, but yes, in the same medical sales industry. Yep.
Similar, but different.
Yep.
Yeah. You talked about you looking at the word impact when you looked at your life and view. So obviously that's something that's very important to you and is probably the key to your purpose and living your best life. What does having impact mean to you? What does that look like?
When I think about impact, I think about a lot of times people will come to me and they're experiencing self-doubt, they're experiencing imposter syndrome, they're feeling uncertain about what the next phase of their life is, they're feeling overwhelmed, burnt out. And it's a lot of working with professionals. My impact is how can I inspire and empower people to become better versions of themselves, both professionally and personally. So when I go in and I do speaking engagements or I come into organizations and I do workshops with them, ultimately what the principles and strategies and advice that I want to teach them is anything that can be applied in both areas of their life so that we are building a whole person, not just looking at the person and saying, this is how I help you succeed professionally. It's like, no, how can I teach you the principles and the strategies to thrive in all areas of your life? That's what I mean by impact.
And these are tried and true, tested to some degree, although you just kind of found that that's your word, if you will, right? Or your why. You've been utilizing these same principles that you're talking about today to have built the successful teams and folks that you worked with for decades, right?
I was very fortunate. The organization that I worked for believed in professional development. So at every point in working for the organization, they exposed us to different trainings. I was very fortunate with that. Plus, I'm a big advocate. I dedicate time every single day to personal and professional development, whether it's reading a book, listening to a podcast. But in my book, Unstoppable Grit, a lot of the principles that I teach are not only from tried and true experience within my own personal life, but also the lives of the people that I've worked with. And everything is backed by research. So which I think is really important because a lot of people will come and say, oh, here's a principle that you should learn. But is it really backed by research to show the proof is in the pudding that these strategies work?
Yeah, I think that's important because just because somebody's doing it doesn't mean that there's any form of success or any kind of methodology behind it that says, hey, this works. So sometimes it takes people finding what works for them, right? Just because it works for somebody else, maybe it won't work for them, or maybe they don't implement it the same way. So I think having that research behind you is very, very important and vital. I heard you talk about this, and I think that this is probably more prevalent than ever in terms of social media, right? And the fact that your social media feed can affect your outlook and could affect your prognosis about how you feel about things. How does somebody go about transforming their feed to help that outlook? Because I think that this is a very vital area that is affecting many people more negatively, I think, than positively. So how do we switch that negativity on its head to make that feed a positive impact in people's lives?
Oh, this is such an ongoing cycle for me that I work on a consistent basis. So when it looks at social media, a lot of times we will get into the comparison trap where we start to compare ourselves to others. And when we compare ourselves to others, then we start to feel that we're inadequate or that we don't have enough, or imposter syndrome comes in, or perfectionism will rise. So that when we start to follow people and we start to look at other people's success and compare it to ours and wonder, well, why don't we have that same success? The reality is we don't know what's going on behind the scenes. We don't know what roadblocks and hurdles that it's taken to get to the point to where they're at. So comparison and looking at that could definitely affect our mindset and how we view our own successes. There's also a lot of times too, especially with the way that marketing is, it's constantly pushing advertisements to us saying, you need to have this. If you don't buy this, you're missing out on this. This is something you have to have. And it's funny because I was just doing this recently where my husband and I are remodeling a portion of our house right now. And so I was looking at Instagram for inspiration for just different before and after photos. But then I found myself with these influencers that are telling me that, well, you need to buy this Amazon best product, the number one seller on Amazon. You need to have this. And I started to take a step back and be like, wow, I'm going to start buying things that I don't necessarily need. I'm going to start comparing myself to people without really truly understanding the back end of their business. I call it taking the remote control to your social media and to your mind. What I started to do is I started to there's options to mute people. So maybe you still want to follow the profile, but maybe you want to give it a 30 days. You can mute it for 30 days. You can unfollow. So that's an option too. You can hide ads saying that it's irrelevant or you see it too often. You can also mark certain profiles as a favorite. So I notice when my mindset is starting to get adrift or astray, I will go to certain profiles that are known for motivational inspiration, and I will mark those profiles as favorites. And then I'll go to that profile and I'll trick the algorithms a little bit and I'll go and like a bunch of their posts. So then I'm telling the algorithms, I want to see more of this content showing up in my newsfeed.
We're taking a quick detour from the amazing show today to bring you the Joy and Productivity Journal. Finding a balance between productivity and joy can feel like an impossible task. But fear not. This journal, inspired by themes in my best-selling book, Financial Planning Made Personal, is here to revolutionize the way you approach your daily routine. And because we believe in letting you experience the joy firsthand, you can download this journal for free at financialplanningmadepersonal.com. Before we return to the show, I have a question for you. What did you do today that brought you joy? I think those are great points because I think many of us feel like we're at the liberty of whatever social media wants to show us or wants us to see or push in front of us. And there are tools, albeit I don't think as many people use them in the way that you mentioned, but there are tools that we could all use to help curate that feed in a way that's either going to lend positivity or lend it in a positive light, something that's going to be beneficial to us rather than just sitting there as bystanders, just accepting whatever's thrown at us on a regular basis. And I think those are great tips. So thank you for that. You mentioned the podcast, Unstoppable Grit. What was the impetus behind the podcast? What was the reasoning behind launching that?
Initially, I started the podcast and it was Dream Job with Danielle Cobo. And it was because initially when I started my business, I was doing a lot of career coaching. I was helping job seekers in developing their brand and helping them thrive through the interview process, negotiating their salary and compensation. And then my business evolved and I started to do more keynote speaking. So I really rebranded the podcast, but there's still a focus on career development, leadership development, and burnout prevention, and really helping people develop the grit, the resilience to thrive in their career, both professionally and personally. What really inspired it was I wanted to have a tool and resource to help the people that may not be able to invest in my services, but I still wanted to be able to make an impact and reach a broader audience. So that's what inspired the podcast. But what I also found through the journey was I've been able to interview and meet some of the top authors, keynote speakers out there in the world by having my podcast. So I've been extremely grateful to develop friendships with people that I probably would have never if I didn't have the podcast as an introduction.
Listen, I get asked that all the time. They say with the podcast, we always get asked, what's the ROI? And I'm like, forget about the ROI. I always lean on what you just said. I've gotten the opportunity to meet with, have conversations with, build friendships with people that I would have never been able to even connect with or maybe even run into over my career as a result of the podcast. And it's such a great opportunity that even if there's no monetary benefit, just having that as part of the ROI to me is a home run.
I get that question all the time. In fact, I ask myself that question all the time. I don't do podcasting for the money because quite honestly, it's actually a business expense for my
Right.
business because you have to pay for somebody to edit and make all the social media graphics and everything that's involved with editing for a podcast. So it's not necessarily doing it for the money, although I know podcasters have monetized theirs and there's different ways of doing it. But I do it just for the relationships of the people that you get to meet and that you get to build with. And to hear from listeners, I listened to that episode and it really resonated with me. And thank you so much for sharing it. Like when I get messages like that, then it's worth everything.
Same. Do you find that people who've gone through circumstances like I've gone through or you've gone through where they lose a parent or God forbid a child or just something where they've hit this incredible roadblock in their life? And I'm not talking about even being necessarily like laid off. I'm talking even higher level than that in terms of life event. Do you think they have a higher propensity to know how to utilize and internalize grit in a positive way versus somebody who hasn't experienced that? Or is it really something that anybody across the board can be successful with?
I believe grit is something that is a combination of being innate within us and it's also nurtured and can be grown. So the more challenges that we overcome, we can either fall victim to those challenges or we can adopt a growth mindset and say, okay, I'm experiencing this particular challenge. I don't see it as a failure. I look at it as saying, where can I learn and where can I grow from this? So it's one of those combinations where you either are a victim or you adopt a growth mindset and you learn and grow. But I do believe the more challenges that you overcome, the more skill sets that you develop and how to overcome challenges in the future. So one of the best advice that was given to me was by my stepdad. And he said, when you're a little kid and you lose a pet, it's preparing you for that time when you get older and maybe you lose a bike because somebody steals a bike. Hopefully that doesn't happen, but something, you lose something big. And then that losing a bike prepares you for that first breakup that you experience. That first breakup that you experience prepares you for potentially losing a family member. And it's just like each stage in life is preparing us and developing different skill sets and different ways that we can respond to adversity and challenges and change in our life.
Right. Which I sense is a bit of an issue with the bubble parent, the helicopter parent, right? That's something that we all want to do the best for our children and protect them. But at the same time, some of those protective measures may actually be hindering things for them later in life as a result, which is kind of what I'm hearing from that comment you made.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's not that I necessarily want to see my kids fail, but I want to see my kids experience challenges so that it's preparing them for the next phase in this world. It's interesting because I was on a podcast and we were talking about consequences for our kids. My twins are 6 years old. So this gentleman was basically talking about like, he doesn't give consequences to his kids. And I'm like, well, I got 6-year-old twins who are feeding off of each other. They're boys, they're high energy. There's consequences in our house. Maybe it's like a timeout for 10 minutes or something along those lines. I believe that we need to have those experiences because that is what the real life is. If you are speeding down the road, the consequence is you're going to get a speeding ticket. Like there is consequences in life and there's challenges that we're going to face. My hope is that the decisions that they make are not permanent decisions. My hope is that they're decisions that maybe are poor that I get to coach them through and teach them through and then help them develop the skill sets for the future. So hopefully a lot of those poor decisions that they're eventually going to make, like we all do, happen under the age of 18 while they're living in my household so I can be there to help them.
Well, listen, mine are 18 and 21. They get along great, but they still go at it every once in a while. They've turned into great supporters of each other. And being that they've gone through adversity, I found it as a huge help because they don't take no for an answer sometimes when they don't have to. So there are a lot of benefits. So keep doing what you're doing. Let's talk about your book for a minute. Your book, Unstoppable Grit, Break Through the 7 Roadblocks Standing Between You and Achieving Your Goals. What do you hope as a result of reading the book that readers walk away? What are the takeaways that you're looking for them to pull out of this great book?
My hope is that they find themselves in these pages. Now, they may not be able to relate to the specific stories that are told, but maybe there's an aspect to the relating to the feelings that they've had. Maybe they've lost a family member, or maybe they've had a big career shift. Maybe they've experienced burnout. They'll be able to relate to how they felt when they were experiencing a similar situation by providing them the tools to prevent and overcome burnout, to get clarity on what they want in their career, to break through the roadblocks that are holding them from achieving their goals, the how to build a fulfilling life, and the 5 stages of adapting to change. My hope is that they're given the tools to overcome adversity and build a career and life that they love.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about joy here, right, all the time. The Midland Money, we're all about joy, and we're going to be talking about joy in a few minutes here. But I think that's so important when we talk to folks, or I talk to people, and they ask me, oh, what do you do? And I think so many of us kind of label ourselves with what we do for a living rather than starting out with actually who we are and what we do. Being a dad and enjoying the sport of hockey, who just happens to be, or a loving husband who happens to be in wealth management, right? I think learning those skills and understanding that is so prevalent. And I think the book really does a good job of trying to get people to start thinking about not just the business end of things, not just the personal end, but they're really one and the same. And you got to weave them together and figure out a way to go ahead as an individual, because both those things are really what are making you up.
Absolutely.
One thing we talk about all the time is emotional burnout. And I know you talk about this also, because especially coming from a very high level role, being that there are goals, you have a team, managing people. What are some tips that people could take away from our conversation today to help identify if they're experiencing emotional burnout? And more importantly, what are some things, maybe 1 or 2 kind of prescriptive things perhaps that they could do to avoid even getting to that point of that emotional burnout?
I'm so glad that you brought up emotional burnout, because in the book, I definitely go through the signs of physical burnout, but I really tap into what the 7 signs of emotional burnout is. And I really break down burnout into 3 different chapters into the book. And we've touched on a little bit of it here, but I do believe that when we understand the triggers, when we have a high level of self-awareness and we're able to quickly identify when we're experiencing burnout and what are the triggers, we're able to quickly overcome it when we have the tools to recover from it. In the book, I talk not only about here's the 7 signs of emotional burnout, how can you identify them within yourself so that when you immediately are starting to see them, you're saying, okay, whoa, wait a minute here. I believe I'm experiencing burnout. This is the reason why, because I'm seeing this individual sign. And oh, by the way, here are some practical strategies that are going to help you overcome that burnout. I believe that Deloitte did a study and they found that 77% of people have experienced burnout at one point in their career. So it's something that even though we have come a long way in creating self-awareness and in creating awareness around burnout, there's still a lot of room to grow.
Yeah. I would argue that the other 23% that said that he never experienced a burnout were probably lying and not being truthful.
I agree with you.
I think at some point, everybody experiences that at some point. It may have been so long ago they don't remember it, so they answer that in the negative, but I find that hard to believe. But I think that's a great point. One thing I wanted to talk to you about, and this is because you've been so open about your mom. I appreciate you being so open about her. Just to share with you, I don't know if you know this about me, but I lost my brother-in-law to suicide. I'm a suicide survivor as well. I sat on the national board for the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention for about 14 years, and I still sit on their investment and their finance committee. And it's something that's very passionate for me and my family to have my brother-in-law's name continue to live on and to be a resource so that other families don't experience what we did and obviously what you've gone through. And number one is thank you very much for being open and honest about it, because I think that the more people like you and I and other celebrities, et cetera, who are talking and openly about this, it just opens up the conversations helpful for everybody out there. What are you looking to accomplish by having that level of honesty about your mom's suicide? What is your personal goal by sharing that personal anecdote?
I hope that we can shift the language around suicide. So a lot of times people will say phrases like, oh, she committed suicide. I'm respectful in saying, hey, you know what? I can I share something with you about certain language? And I always ask for permission first because I believe that just creates like a safe, vulnerable environment. But I'll say, I used to say that phrase too. And what I've learned is when we use the word commit, it's almost like they're committing a crime. And a lot of times, one of the reasons why people feel like the only option is suicide is they either feel like they're so depressed that they feel like there's no way out, or they feel like they're relieving their family of a burden for whatever reason of that burden is. So it's not that they're committing a crime. It's a mental illness that a lot of reasons why people are taken by suicide. So I never say commit, I say taken. But I believe that when we can shift the language around suicide and we can create more awareness around mental health and the resources that are out there, but also the resources that are lacking right now. And especially being a military spouse and seeing that every 22 minutes, a veteran is taken by suicide, it's because of the lack of resources that we have for our veterans and for our mental health community. So my hope is that by being open and honest about it, I can really shift the awareness, the perspective, the language that we use. Also, the one phrase that I always tell people is suicide is a permanent solution to a temporary problem. Mm-hmm. And so go seek help. Your life is worth it.
Yeah, great stuff. And like you, I do the same thing with the language. I use the term died by suicide because really I feel like there was no difference between my mom who died from cancer versus my brother-in-law who died from a mental illness. Ultimately, that was his condition that led him to pass away. So thank you for correcting that and doing it in a meaningful way. So now we'll shift to joy because like I said, we were going to end on a joyful note. So I want to make sure we do that. And we ask each of our guests the same last question, Danielle, and that is, what did you do today that brought you joy and put you in the right mindset for success?
The one thing that I did today that brought me joy was I did Pilates. I'm a big advocate of moving your body to increase your endorphins and help you in that natural boost of energy and happiness. And so I did Pilates today.
Awesome. And I'm sure getting a little alone time from the children is also a little helpful to that joy as well. So I will tell you this, enjoy every minute with them. I remember when my kids were I can't, this small, this big, they weren't ever really small kids. And now they're 18 and 21 and it's amazing. It went by in a flash. So enjoy every minute of it. So I thank you for coming on the show, Danielle, and sharing your story. We're going to have all of your information in the show notes. But if people want to find you, learn more about you, find the book or the podcast, what's the easiest and the best way for them to do that?
Yeah. So the book is Unstoppable Grit. It's available on Amazon. And then also they can find me on my podcast, Unstoppable Grit Podcast with Danielle Cobo.
Awesome. Well, thank you for your time. I appreciate it and enjoy the day. I want to thank Danielle Cobo for being a guest on the Midland Money Mindset. Unstoppable Grit describes everything about Danielle Cobo. Some prime examples were when her husband was deployed and she was taking care of their young children and excelling at her demanding job, or when she led her team to number one through corporate upheaval. Danielle's book outlines how you can thrive and use unstoppable grit to your advantage too. Danielle Cobo and her book Unstoppable Grit can be found across most social media platforms. All the contact information needed to find them can be found in the show notes. Thank you for joining us this week on the Midland Money Mindset. Make sure you visit our website at midlandmoneymindset.com and smash the subscribe button so you don't miss a show. We encourage you to help others find our valuable content, and please don't keep us a secret. You can also schedule an Is There a Fit call right from our website or by using the link that you'll find in the description section of your podcast player or app. And be sure to join us for our next episode to learn more about getting your mind right when it comes to all things money.
The opinions voiced in the Midland Money Mindset Show with Lawrence Sprung are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. Past performance is no guarantee of future results. All indices are unmanaged and may not be invested into directly. Investing involves risk, including possible loss of principal. No strategy ensures success or protects against loss. To determine what may be appropriate for you, consult with your attorney, accountant, financial or tax advisor prior to investing. Investment advisory services offered through CWM LLC, an SEC-registered investment advisor. Guests on the Mitlin Money Mindset Show are not affiliated with CWM LLC.